Hi there, this is Jaime Alejandro with the Arts Calling Podcast, the podcast where I interview hardworking independent creatives in the literary, visual, and performing arts. As I mentioned before, there won't be any shoutouts this holiday season, but please stay tuned for more of those coming in 2024. So let's get things rolling. Today, I am thrilled to be Arts Calling writer and educator Kate Brandt. Here's a little bit about our guest. Kate Brandt is a graduate of the MFA Writing program at Sarah Lawrence College. Her work has appeared in literary anthologies, Tricycle, The Buddhist Review, Literary Mama, Ginosko, and Redivider, among other publications. Hope for the Worst, her first novel, is informed by her experiences with Tibetan Buddhism, magic, self-delusion, desire, despair, and healing, as well as her travels through Europe, Africa, and Asia. Kate is also a teacher and teacher trainer in adult literacy in New York City. In this role, she is privileged to work with a community of smart, dedicated educators in service to adult students who, despite difficult circumstances, continue to pursue an education in the hope of improving their lives. This was a very moving, very personal conversation that we shared, Kate and I hope that you enjoy. So without further delay, let's give her a call. Good morning. Is anybody there?
I'm here.
Good morning. How are you?
Okay. How are you?
Oh, I'm well. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm thrilled to get a chance to chat this morning. I know we woke up a little bit early, but you're over on the East Coast, right? So it's not too bad for you?
That's right. Yes.
So, how's things where you are?
It's a little gray and cold here.
Yeah. I prefer my weather cold. I think this is my favorite season, especially the spooky season. But we're here to talk about your latest work, Hope for the Worst, which is a really wonderful read. I had the pleasure of starting, and I just realized that I got to the part when the journey was about to begin. So I got a lot of the character development in the beginning that was so engaging and so exciting for me to check out, that I wanted to see if you could maybe give us an introduction on the book and we could start there, because I feel it's such a powerful way to begin, especially with a work like yours.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, Hope for the Worst is the story of a 20-something young woman living in New York City in the 1980s. And she is just out of college and kind of very disaffected by what she finds. You know, she's been sort of studying all these lofty things in college, and now the question is, how fast can you type? And she's also kind of depressed. She has some family problems. And so she's looking for something. She's looking for something better. And she runs into a Buddhist teacher who seems to have all of the answers that she's been looking for. And so she starts going to his lectures, and he ends up seducing her. And she falls in love with him and becomes more and more focused on him. And when he cuts her off, it creates a huge crisis for her. Mm-hmm. And this story is about how she deals with that crisis, how she comes out of that, what she learns from it. And there are a number of questions I am posing in the book. It is made up of journal entries and letters. And the reason that I chose those forms is because this book is really not so much an action-packed book as it's a book about a person's mind. Mm-hmm. I did want to bring in ideas from Buddhism. And so the book is really, the journal entries really follow her thoughts and feelings in a kind of a granular way. So it's really, Buddhism really is about dealing with your own mind. And so in that sense, it is really bringing in Buddhist concepts. There are other ways that it is also bringing in Buddhist concepts. And so go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to, sorry for interjecting. I was just going to mention that I hadn't realized that, but the reason I enjoyed the beginning was because you say that it wasn't action packed, but when you're in somebody's mind, it is nonstop and it has this
Right.
energy that is just continuously going. And there's another concern or another
Right.
worry or why am I like this? And though I wanted to ask you about the structure of it, with the journal entries and the notebooks in particular, which was really
Right.
interesting. But can you tell me a little about how this character is an autobiographical avatar, if you will, or just like, can you share a little bit more about that? Because this is an autobiography of sorts, but it kind of isn't. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it is very autobiographical in the sense that it is based on my own experience that took place in my 20s in the 1980s in New York City. And it is, there are two reasons why it's a novel instead of instead of a memoir. One reason is that it was to protect my family. My family has been through a lot. There's been a lot of estrangement, a lot of anger. And so I wanted to protect my family that way. And the other reason is that, with memoir, you have to stick closer to the facts. And it narrows what you can do with the story. So I took things that really happened and I rearranged them in terms of time, so that I could have a story arc that was more kind of classical in a way. It gave me more freedom.
Yeah. So when do you make this decision to go with a more semi-autobiographical approach? Because I imagine that you wrestled with this. I imagine that it took some time for you to figure out, am I going to be able to turn this into a memoir, or was that your original thinking? Like, what made you decide that, and how long ago was that in the process?
So, writing this novel was a very long process. I have an absolutely wonderful writing group. And one of the things that we would do is we would do a free write every time we met. And there would be a lot of groaning. I don't want to do it. And then it always ended up, producing some magic. So it started as a free write. It was a free write about a journey. And I actually was writing about this journey that I used to take with this man from the west side of Spring Street to the east side of Spring Street. And it was a very long journey because it was the time between when I met him and when we would sort of start our tryst. And when I wrote about it, everyone in the group said, you have to write about this. And my father is a writer, and one of the things that he said to me once about art that I never forgot is he said, art has to have strangeness. And so this was an extremely strange experience. And so I felt that I could have more impact with fiction because I could have that freedom to sort of do what I wanted with it. Because there were certain things I wanted to talk about, and that was more important to me than, really, being so true to what happened, and also, to be honest, I wanted to protect his family, this man, because, it's not their fault. They didn't, they weren't involved. So, and I didn't feel like it needed to be memoir. I felt like I could tell the same story with fiction and actually be a little bit more effective.
Yeah. And I'm really curious what that takes. I think it does take a lot of cooperation on behalf of all parties involved to be upfront about the memoir aspect of it and say, this is coming out, and it's not just my story at this point. This is going to involve every single person that has sort of like rooted into my own journey. And so I can imagine that that's a really huge emotional effort to try to like coordinate all of these perspectives and
Yes.
everyone sort of be like,
Yes.
are we cool with this? Is this going to be an
Yeah.
acceptable? Yeah.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, my father still doesn't know I've written a book.
Mm,
So, even making it a novel I have a very delicate relationship with him.
I see.
And because it's small press, I knew that he would never come across this book.
Oh,
So,
goodness. Yeah, and I imagine that is a tough situation to be in, especially given that he's a writer himself. There has to be some things that obviously we can get to that later if you're comfortable with it. But in terms of the book and sort of finding that structure, tell me a little bit more about the notebooks. How do you arrive at that device to build something that is so engaging? Because from the moment I started reading it, I said this is really frenetic to me, because of that not only as I said, the pace of being in somebody else's head, but the delivery. So tell me a bit about how you find that. I guess
right.
it's like an epistolary-esque sort of thing.
Yes.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that's what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so it is kind of an interesting story because it was long and torturous, to be honest. I always knew I wanted to write a novel of letters. And in the beginning, this was a very different story. There were two archaeologists who were writing back and forth to each other. One of them was in Tibet. I was setting the story in Tibet to begin with. And it took me many, many, many transformations to get to where I got to. And the way that happened was by bringing various versions to my writing group. And they, they're very good friends, so they would read it. And, they refused to tell me that it was right until it was right. And that, that's true friendship, because I would have wanted to put someone out of their misery. But I think that what it started out was I felt like, oh, I have to have a story that has a big bang. Nobody's going to want to read it. It has to be, it's to start in Tibet. It has to start with something really exciting happening. And what I finally came to was realizing that I could value what you were talking about, being in somebody's mind, and that was my strength doing that, and that was what the story was about. Telling the story of the love affair, that was always there, and I always knew that was the heart of the book. So it was about framing it. That's where I struggled so very much, was framing it.
Yeah, and I think you had to establish, and I think that's what's so effective about the piece. And maybe it's because that is the area that I focused on, the first, 7,500 pages or so, that are so emotional, and you feel for this person as she's going through this process of feeling like an alien, like somebody who just doesn't have a place. And it does emphasize the perspective of depression. It does emphasize that kind of anxiety that you would have from just feeling like nobody really recognizes you for what you are, truly. And I imagine, if I may ask, was there a point where you had to step away emotionally? Because obviously there are some elements of yourself here that I feel are pretty heartbreaking to perhaps relive, if there is some truth to the beginning of that time period. Was there a moment where you had to step back from that?
So, that's such a good question to ask. I mean, this was really the biggest cataclysm of my life, this whole situation. And so I spent a lot of time processing this. And it was really time, it was really time that allowed me to, and it was actually helpful and cathartic to write this. It was, I had processed it so much already. And at this point, I was just very interested in calling up those emotions so that I could the thing about writing is that why do people write? My first writing teacher said people write because they weren't invited to the party, you know? And, it's this loneliness. And, one way to sort of bridge that loneliness is if you can evoke, this is how it was for me, and in a way that other people will read it and experience it, you are less lonely. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but it wasn't actually that hard for me to write it.
Yeah, certainly does. And I appreciate that because I'm pretty much obsessed with this idea of getting things out of your system. And I personally feel that there are some things in my life that I felt like I was obsessing over, or that were just annihilating me emotionally. And there was a decade of my life that was very much about the qualms and issues that I had with faith, the issues that I had with certain family dynamics, and very specific things to me. But as I've mentioned in the podcast before, it's this act of relieving that weight off of your shoulders, whether you do it through a therapist or creatively or however you do it. Then you look at the world with new eyes, it seems. And even your past, you start to look with a whole new framework.
So true.
And it feels like that was way past, and you felt like you had atoned for that emotional burden a long, long time ago. So with that newfound clarity, then you just dug right in, and I imagine you just looked at the mechanics of the thing, and here's this piece, here's another piece. How did you assemble it then? How did you find the right arc, as you were saying?
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest struggles was realizing that the journey would come at the end, and that it would be this sort of climactic part of the book. For the longest time, I felt like, I have to grab people right away. At one point, this story started with this character being involved. I was in Tibet in 1986, 87, and there were some protests that broke out then in Lhasa, and it started with her. There were some Westerners who were involved, and it started with her, being involved with that. And so it took me a long time to trust that I could write a story that was about emotion and ideas, and that it would be something that other people would want to read.
Yeah. And I'm curious, one of the great concerns, I guess I should say, in the work is Buddhism, the faith. And I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit on what your sort of relationship to faith is, and how that started when you were younger, because you said something really interesting on another podcast that I'm hoping that maybe you can tap into once again, is this idea of your parents having different ideas about faith, which I thought might be something worth sharing, but how you've arrived at Buddhism of all things.
Right. Yeah. So I'm really, really glad you asked that. I think I've done a lot of thinking about this. I mean, as I said, at that time, I was really looking for answers because, I grew up, there was a little bit of church going, but it was not by any means the center of our lives. It was like something you did because that was what we did. That was the right thing to do. And my mother would march us off to church. My father would stand there and say, God is dead. Right. So Christianity wasn't really, a presence in our house. But, I grew up during the 60s, and that was when some of the ideas about Eastern religion were starting to become more, prevalent. And my father was into that. He brought some of that home. And I think that I was really looking for something when I was in my 20s. And that is, in a certain sense, what I stumbled into. And the first thing that really pulled me about it is, the first noble truth is life is suffering. And, I was looking at the world feeling like, I was bursting into this, giant cloud of capitalism, I was, everything seemed really fake. Everything was for sale. Where's the heart? And so Buddhism really is a very good antidote to that, as are many faiths. We have a society that's a little crazy with capitalism, and if you don't grow up with faith, you're lucky if you run into something that works for you, I think.
Right. Yeah, you touch on something that is so dear to me, this idea that, because I'm a parent, and I have such a complicated relationship with my own faith, and I go back and forth, and I have spurts of spirituality, and then there's an extreme aspect of certain things. But just this notion of finding a foundation, a spiritual foundation. And I'd like to ask if Buddhism is still a part of your life, or if this was a season of your life where Buddhism in your early 20s or your mid 20s was sort of the focal point of kind of where you were at.
Yeah. So Buddhism is still my belief system. I do meditate. I'm not this really regular meditator. I will go to it like other people go to, other people go to church when things aren't going well. To be honest, I will do the same. It does feel like a faith that I have enough understanding of what it's about, that it feels like a very real, we say when someone sort of officially becomes Buddhist, they say, I take refuge. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. And that is really how it feels, is that you are, part of what I was talking about in this book is the way that you can, one of the things that the teacher kept talking about was the trickster. And he says, the trickster is going to show you who you really are. And who you really are may not be the exalted idea of what you want it to be. Who you really are may be much more humbling. And when you are in that place, you need a refuge. And we all have been brought to our knees by something, right? And that is where you can go when there's nothing else, I feel.
Yeah, that's absolutely powerful. It's getting like the cold bucket of water over you, and
yes,
it
exactly.
surprises you.
And that was really what the actual experience was like for me. I was really, I was being gaslit a bit and being told, you're gonna reach this enlightened state. And when I finally realized that I wasn't going, when that wasn't going to happen, I had to really sit down and reassess, that I am actually, I am a person who has all these needs, and I've been trying to get my needs met in this place where they're not going to get met. And I had to sort of, it was a very humbling experience.
So if we could talk for a minute about what you mentioned earlier about Hope for the Worst, which is, you called it a Me Too book in a Buddhist setting. And I'd like to ask you a bit more about that in terms of, what is it that you think is timely about the work in regards to Me Too, and what are the things that you walked away with in terms of your learning experiences about that situation from a Me Too perspective?
Timely is a funny word, because in publishing there's these trends and they go by really fast. And so
let me correct that. Sorry, I should have said ever timely. So
thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of. I think that, it's funny for me as a person a young woman in the 80s, when it was really still, a lot of things were still okay to do. It was okay for teachers to seduce their students. It was, and that turned around, and I'm glad it turned around, because I think that that there is a kind of predatory aspect to, older men sort of seducing younger women. And I'm glad that I feel like Me Too is sort of telling a truth about that that's really not okay. In terms of what I learned from the experience, I think one of the big things that I came out with is that it's going to be other women who will rescue you. That was my experience. That's been the sort of saving, the hand that was held out to help me when I was really in some of my worst times, is female friendship really rescued me. But also that in terms of kind of psychology and spirituality, what I really learned from that is, you have to value yourself. And one reason why it was so confusing when it came to Buddhism is that there's one of the sort of key precepts of Buddhism is this idea of no self, that the self is an illusion that comes from, we have all these different sensations and aspects, and we create this illusion of a self out of it. So while I was going through this relationship and asking myself, why is this person treating me so badly? There was also this idea of no self. Well, if there's no self, why am I being so selfish? Why am I thinking about, myself so much? I should be transcending this. And I think a learning that came out of that is that you have to value yourself. You have to respect yourself always. That's not really what no self means. It's not really about self-denial, self-abnegation. No self is more about identifying yourself with a bigger picture. No self is really more about not over-identifying with your own thoughts, being, connected to a bigger picture. And part of that is just accepting mystery, that there's parts of ourselves that we don't know or can't define, but that's a good thing.
That's incredibly inspiring, and that is the world, the spiritual world that I want to navigate is being okay with not knowing, but
yes,
but accepting love for yourself in the process, even though you'll never be able to fully understand that picture.
I want to say one more thing about that, is that one of the things that sort of made a light bulb go off in my head about that was reading Simone Weil. I don't know if you have heard of her. She was a German Jew who converted to Catholicism, and she wrote a book called Gravity and Grace. And one of the things that she says is, love your neighbor as yourself, love yourself as your neighbor. And it kind of made me realize that, you should give yourself at least as much love as you would give to your neighbor,
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm going to have to check that out. That sounds amazing. I got a couple more questions to be mindful of your time here, but if we could pivot for just a moment into the mechanics of writing in the publishing process, because I believe that you've had an interesting situation here with that. Can you tell me how long it took you to work on this? Like when you actually started the mission of having a manuscript, how long did it take you to actually unspool this thing and put it back together with the help of the writers group?
10 years. It was a very long. Yeah. I mean, I work just to be fair to myself. I also have a job, but it was a very long process. one of the things that's very interesting about that is that you can get an idea about. So what happened was one of my friends said to me, you've written a book about traveling, that didn't get published, and you've written about love and that didn't get published. So you really should really put those two ideas together. Right. And so then I had this idea, and I felt like the book had to be more about travel. It had to be exciting. It would be about, being in different places. And, there's, talk about a fixed idea. I just had this fixed idea, and it just took me the longest time to accept that that was not the right way to do it. And I think, that's where you have to have those other eyes, and you have to have eyes that you trust. You have to have eyes, we have a very close writing group. I know that all of those women really love me. And so I know that I can trust what they say. There's no meanness, there's no pettiness. They want me to do the best work I can do. And they really believed in me more than I believed in myself, So that was very important.
Yeah, what a gift that is to have a supportive group of folks who are able to kind of get you to that next step. But if we could dabble just a little bit more on some of the problem issues or the problems that you had with the manuscript, because I like to refer to these things as like a dark moment, right? Where you just nothing is working, or there's a huge obstacle in the way. Do you remember a moment like that, whether it was something brought to you by the group or something else, kind of like the rigid thing that you had set for it, but what was something that you felt was almost not worth pursuing anymore, or that you felt was like destroying the project that you kind of overcame?
I'll tell you a funny story about that.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh. So first of all, when I look back at the titles of my different documents in my Word, there are things like try again, if at first you don't succeed, just kill me. It gets worse and worse and worse, because you do start to doubt whether you can pull this project off, And I do remember there was this moment where my cat managed to get out and break its leg.
Oh,
and
no.
And I was taking care of this cat. My ex-husband had left. I was on my own with my child and this cat, and the cat could not jump. So it was me and the cat in this little tiny room where there was no place to jump, and we were hanging out of this room, and I was in complete despair about the book. And my friend Jimin called me, and she said, like, okay, what is it really about? What's her problem? So that was one of those dark moments where every time you start again, you're going back to the drawing board. Anything can happen. That's what's so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I think what made it a little easier for me was knowing what worked. So another of my good friends from the writing group had told me, this part really works. So I knew what works. So that gives you a ray of hope that you have something that is there, the core of it. And that was the story about the affair. And that is why I always tend to write from my own experience, because that's where the oomph comes from for me. Some people are really good at making things up. I'm not so good at making things up. That's where I really struggle, is story, right? I'm very good at putting words together, but story is difficult.
Yeah, and I have to compliment you here on what I've read of the book, which is exactly what you're saying. And what a beautiful thing it is to know what your strengths are and what things maybe you don't need to spend time on, or maybe look at other ways to bring the story to life. But in regard to your job, because you have a job that can be described as, I guess, mentally taxing, being an educator. You're an adult literacy teacher, correct?
Yes.
So Can you talk to me a little bit about that and how you are able to manage the mental strain of being an educator? Because no matter who you're teaching, that is a lot to process, and then come home to write and balance life, as it were, because you're a parent as well, you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, now I'm an empty nester,
A lot easier,
so
I
it's
take it.
been
Yeah.
really tough. Um,
Mm.
so I would say that um, writing, I was pretty disciplined about writing. I would write in the morning, and I don't work 5 days a week. I work 4 days a week. So I would have 3 mornings every week when I would work. And to be honest, the pandemic, working at home, I really was able to finish the book that way. Um, the job, first of all, my job is I teach, but there's a lot of admin. So it's a lot easier than really having to be constantly in the classroom, giving and delivering. So right now, I would say that the teaching is feeding me so much because my students have been through incredibly traumatic things. And, one of the things that's difficult about teaching adult literacy is that, we're different social classes. I, I was always good at school. I never had to worry about the lights being turned off at my house. I had certain privileges from being middle class. And if you have a different background from your students, it can be sometimes hard to bridge. But actually, being able to relate to them on an emotional level, it really feeds me, and it helps me build trust with them and use literacy as a way to, you can write about things that have happened to you, can write about your emotions, and we can all meet in that place, and so that's really been good for me because I became very isolated during the pandemic. I got divorced, my son left for college, and so actually having that deep connection with my students has been very, very fulfilling for me. So I'm feel lucky to have it, actually.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful to hear. And it is so important, because I feel like adult literacy in particular is I don't want to say that it's this huge problem in our country, but for folks who want to continue to improve themselves, I think you're doing a phenomenal service to your community and to your folks over on your side of the world, because we all need to be encouraged that it's okay to learn no matter what age we are. And to see these folks who legitimately have that need, that drive to improve and get better, has got to be like, I don't know. I don't want to say a
It's
drug, that might be offensive, but it's exhilarating.
very inspiring. It really is. I mean, my students just have so much that they're dealing with, and yeah, I'm really, I really admire them.
Yeah. So if we could talk about making your way to publication, can you tell me a bit about what that experience was like for you? When did you start shopping the manuscript around, and how did that go for you?
So I'm very lucky to be in a writers group where some of the other folks have been published. So I had like a little roadmap. I had information about how to go about it. And I started by looking for an agent. And, that's a very demoralizing experience. You when there's a lot of time. It's very labor and time intensive. You have to read about what they're looking for. You have to craft a query to them. You have, all of these things. Um, so I did that for a while. I queried, quite a few agents. And then I decided, I had a friend who she had gone through a similar experience, and then finally her book was accepted by a small press. And I decided to submit to a lot of small presses because there's no go-between. With an agent, it's like first you have to find an agent, then the agent has to find someone for your book. And I just didn't, that was a lot to go through. And so it was during the pandemic, and a lot of the small presses were closed down. They were not accepting. But it didn't actually take that long to get accepted by Vine Leaves. And I've been really happy with the experience. The person who was my editor, Melanie Faith, really understood what I was trying to do. And that, means a lot. Gave great critique. The only thing I would say is that, I have a lot to compare with because there are folks in my group who have gotten a very big splash. There are folks who've been in the middle. And I think the hard thing about a small press is that it's print on demand. So bookstores don't want to carry it because you can't return it. So, and I'm not a person, if you want to publish with a small press, you either have to hire a publicist. That's what my friend did. I thought, I'll do that too. And then I found out how much that was going to cost. And I said, I wasn't doing that, So you either have to have the money to do that, or you have to be that's all you're doing for like 6 months. And I'm just not a self-promoting person all that much. That's just not who I am and not what I want to do with my life.
Yeah, and that's totally understandable. And I think I'm of the same ilk as you when it comes to that, because there's only so much time and there are other things in life. But I imagine that there is a tremendous sense of accomplishment and a weight lifted off your shoulders knowing that the work exists and that it is well written. And from what I've seen on Goodreads, very well received from the people who have read it and have acknowledged it. So it's really wonderful to see. And I do want to congratulate you on that, because to do that, to get to where you have gotten with this work, that's to be celebrated. So I got one more. I got one more, to be mindful of your time here, but I'm curious what's on the horizon for you, and what are you looking to work on this coming year? What are you looking to improve on, and what is sort of like turning in your mind and inspiring you? Yeah. Right.
So to be honest with you, it's been a little bit demoralizing, right? With a small press, unless you really work hard, you're not going to reach that many people. And this book was sort of like, this is what I have to say. This is what I have to give. So I'm doing less writing and more kind of processing my life right now, and where I'm at in life. I'm at this whole new stage where I'm pretty isolated. I work, because of the pandemic, I'm still working at home a lot, and I'm divorced and my son went off to college. So I'm kind of trying to remake my life for this new situation. I am reading a lot, which is really wonderful. And the place that I always go when I don't know what to write is fairy tales. So right now I'm working on some very short memoir pieces and a fairy tale. I discovered Kelly Link, the writer Kelly Link, and I really love her. And so that has kind of inspired me. So yeah, I'm, I don't have to make my career as a writer. And so that takes a lot of pressure off. I think it's important to be mindful that, we only have one life and we should do what really calls to us, So you're right. It has been really a good feeling to have this book out of the world, to tell my story. And now I'm just, I don't want to write just to write. I want to write when I need to write, when it comes to me.
Yeah.
So.
I can't imagine a better note to end on, but I also can't imagine a better sentiment to how I feel we should live our lives. Because as creative people, and I'm guilty of this myself, we have so much emotional baggage about being successful as creatives. And what is successful? What does that even mean? That's a whole conversation in and of itself, but I just really can't thank you enough for your time, Kate. This has been incredibly inspiring to me, and I want to applaud you once again for, these insights that you've shared, for the work that you've written, which is incredibly engaging, and I urge everyone to go and check it out. And I'm going to put stuff in the episode description so that folks can take a look at it. But this has really been a blast, so I can't thank you enough.
This is the most empathetic, insightful interview I have ever had.
Oh, goodness.
I thank you so much for doing that. It's just, you're putting it out into the world, and I really thank you for that.
Well, your time is much appreciated. Thank you so much for the kind words, and please stay in touch. Let me know, when the next one comes along, and we'll probably talk down the road. How about that?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
All right. Well, you take care, and I'll be in touch real soon.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.